PutsoLido back again with another video. Today in our video we're going to be rating the top 5 greatest African UFC fighters of all time. African UFC fighters of all time. Okay, so I'm gonna start with the number 5, going to the number 1 greatest African fighter of all time in the UFC. Number 5 greatest African fighter of all time. I'm going to have to go with Themba Gorimbo. That's my pick for the number 5 greatest African fighter of all time. This is why I have to go with Themba Gorimbo. Number 1. Okay, my decision is a little bit biased. Number 1, Themba Gorimbo is Zimbabwean. The only Zimbabwean in the UFC right now. The only Zimbabwean in the UFC right now. So Themba Gorimbo being the only Zimbabwean is going to bring the Zimbabwean eyes to the UFC. Apart from that, Themba Gorimbo is actually a draw. He's actually a draw in the UFC. I know most of you are probably going like, oh, who the fuck is Themba Gorimbo? Okay, this is why I say Themba Gorimbo is a draw. Themba has ties with one of the most influential people in the world, the most followed American man on Instagram, The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. I think most of you probably know that The Rock bought Themba a house and stuff. So, being that as it may, this relationship between Themba and The Rock, it influences people to gravitate towards Themba Gorimbo, to feel sympathetic towards him. That is why when he fights, his post-fight press conferences, they get a lot of views on YouTube and stuff. So he's a draw, Themba Gorimbo. And he's also a great fighter. I think he's undefeated in the UFC right now. I'm not sure. I'll have to check, but I think he's undefeated. Yes, Themba Gorimbo has to go to number 5 because he's winning fights, he's popular, and he's definitely going to keep getting popular, bigger and bigger and bigger, Themba Gorimbo. So I'm going to put it, and I promise you this, Themba Gorimbo will be a UFC champion one day. So I have to put him on number 5. Number 4. The greatest African UFC fighters of all time. Number 4, I'm going to have to put the realest African in the room, the only residing African champion, the one UFC fighter who trains in Africa, who lives in Africa, who breathes the African air, the one and only African in the UFC, the white African, Dricus Duplessis. Yeah, Duplessis. I'm gonna have to go with Duplessis. Duplessis is the number 4 greatest UFC African fighter of all time. Look at what Dricus has done in a short time. Wait, so I used to think Dricus was trash. I won't lie. I used to hate on Dricus, but I decided to like go through his career, and dude is legit. As legit as shit. So Dricus is a former 2-time EFC champion, midweight and welterweight. He also did that in, I think it was Switzerland or whatever, in Europe. There's a promotion he fought for. Yeah, that one. So Dricus, he's the shit, man. He's the real shit. And look at him now. He's the UFC midweight champion. Beat Israel Adesanya. He beat him. Dricus, his trash talk is elite. I mean, he made Sean Strickland cry. He made Israel Adesanya cry with his words. Man, that dude is definitely meant to do great things. So I believe if Dricus Duplessis ever fights with Alex Pereira, and if Dricus beats Alex Pereira, I'm elevating him to the best African fighter of all time. But right now I'm putting him at number 4 because he's done a lot. He's great. Now going to number 3, greatest UFC African fighter of all time. Number 3, I'm going to have to put Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou, the Predator from Cameroon. So Francis has had an interesting career, man. Like, Bro is the only UFC fighter to ever go against Dana White and actually succeed and actually come up on top. So Francis, former UFC heavyweight champion, beating the greatest UFC heavyweight of all time, Stipe Miocic, to become champion. I mean, that's unprecedented. Like, he's the greatest motherfucker I've ever seen. He's a monster. He's scary. Francis Ngannou, and he went from that to fighting arguably the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time, and actually won the fight. Of course, the judges, they say he lost, but Tom Fury knows. Fury knows. He knows the truth. He lost that fight. Now look, the guy leaves the UFC against Dana White's blessings, and he goes and he fights Fury, the biggest heavyweight boxer of all time, wins that fight, and goes on from there to fight Anthony Joshua. Anthony Joshua of all people. Although he got flatlined in that fight, but the achievement, the accomplishment, it's just something else. It's like a simulation, man. Like, his life got me thinking that life is a simulation. Like, it's just amazing. It's incredible. So yeah, Francis Ngannou's accomplishments, they're going to make me put him at what? At number 3 greatest African UFC fighter of all time. Now let's go to number 2. The number 2 greatest African UFC fighter. Guess. I'm gonna give you 5 seconds to guess. Kamaru Usman. Kamarudini Usman. Marty Fake Newsman. That's my number 2 greatest African UFC fighter of all time. Now, Kamaru Usman, the resume on that motherfucker is just crazy. The dude, one of the most dominant welterweight in UFC history. He ran through the division and he ran through the division again. Man, fuck what people say about what's his name? What's the name of that guy? The Canadian guy. What's his name? What's his name? Saint Pierre. Fuck, man, screw Saint Pierre. Kamaru Usman is the greatest welterweight of all time. Yo people just like hating on Kamaru for no reason, but he's the greatest welterweight of all time, and that's why I'm putting him on the number 2 spot. Went through the division again, was dominating. His fight against Leon, his first fight, and got caught. The second fight, it was a close fight, and I honestly think Kamaru did enough to win that fight, but screw it. Kamaru Usman, the greatest welterweight of all time, one of the biggest Nigerian stars in combat sports in the world. Kamaru Usman starred in Black Panther, man. Black Panther, man. How can he not be the greatest African fighter of all time? So Kamaru Usman goes to the number 2 spot. Number 1, the greatest African UFC fighter of all time. The one, the only, Israel Adesanya, the last style bender. That's the number 1 greatest UFC African fighter of all time. Israel, easy, style bender. Now, he is probably also the most controversial UFC fighter, one of the most controversial UFC fighters of all time. So here's why I put Israel on the number 1 spot. Israel is the greatest UFC fighter, the greatest UFC fighter to ever come out of Africa. He is the biggest star in the UFC since Conor McGregor. He is the biggest star in the UFC since Conor McGregor. And people, they try to dismiss this fact because he's black, because he's African, because he's whatever, because I don't know. But I don't know, people just hate on that guy. Maybe because of the dog stuff, because of the painted nails and shit. But fuck that. Those are his personal choices. I don't give a fuck about that. But I say he's the biggest star in the UFC since Conor McGregor. I mean, stats don't lie, man. His fight against Robert Whittaker had the biggest attendance in UFC history. There's never been a fight to take that record from him. Israel, interim middleweight champion, midweight champion, midweight champion again. No one's ever done that. 3-time middleweight champion, counting the interim. 12 consecutive title fights. The most active champion in UFC history. 2-time middleweight champion. Man, bro is a star, man. Y'all can hate on easy. The sport needs Israel Adesanya. Israel Adesanya does not need the sport. He's the biggest star in UFC history since Conor McGregor, and that's just facts, man. And I really took my time to compile this list of the greatest African fighters in UFC history, and I used facts. So don't y'all go hating and shit. So yeah, so that's my list. Number 5, we have Themba Gorimbo. Number 4, Dricus. Number 3, Francis. Number 2, Kamaru Dini. Number 1, the last style bender. Greatest list ever compiled. Peace. PutsoLido, like, subscribe, and share, and comment. See you in the next video.